We have a few minutes to deal with some questions. We can't do them all. Because lunch is coming. In my profession, we say the mind can absorb what the stomach can endure. And people race out at a time like this. I'm going to read some of the questions from the audience, just a few. And then I'm taking my prerogative of asking 2 questions of my own. So I just like my beloved panelists to think about my 2 questions, and we'll get up to them after we do the audience questions. The first is, hey, I'm a scientist. If there's one fact you want to know to help you in your work, what is it? What's your highest science need to make your work easier or better? I'd like to hear that. In other words, is science all in it? Don't come up again. My second question is going to be your biggest nightmare. What's your biggest design strategy nightmare? You all design projects in different ways. What are you really worried about in your projects that might cause failure? First question. I eliminated the one that said, why don't you comb your hair? Here's a good one, and maybe Pippa, anybody can answer, or all of you can. There are more storms coming. The next storm might destroy the oyster reef or the breakwater. Does it pay to really do it?
So one thing, I think that's a big fear and risk, and one of the points that Phil made, and one of the reef won't get destroyed. It's a very large pile of rocks. It's a breakwater, right, in the water. If we get a bigger storm than the last storm, bigger than Sandy, it might not be as effective. It might not reduce the waves, but it's not going to fail catastrophically. It's always going to do some good. It's always going to mitigate, to reduce the waves. And versus a wall that is 10 feet high, and after 10 feet, it gets overtopped. And I think this is a critical question we need to think about on our shorelines. There may be places where we need to build very, very high. We've really got to keep the water out, but there's going to be other places where we want to really think critically about, well, do we want to keep the water out up to this point and then flood everyone to 13 feet? And so, yeah, I don't think we're worried about the breakwater and the reef getting washed away. I think that's kind of part of the goal of this project.
Thank you. Pippa, actually, there's a little follow-up, which I think you can answer quickly. You're putting the breakwater down. What's the ecological value of rock barriers in an ecological system that was otherwise completely devoid of rocks historically? And what's the ecological loss to the regions where you're getting the rock from? A full cost benefit, please.
Yeah, that second one I hadn't thought of. The first one, I'm going to kind of throw back to a question a little bit, in that I think that's one of our biggest unknowns. We're ready to get out there and start doing the existing habitat assessment that we need to see what the impact of these in the water are. That said, we've thought a lot about what's there to the extent that we can see it and survey it. I think Lauren and Gina are here, and actually, this is just an anecdote of the process, one of the concerns was existing clam habitat. There's not oysters there now, but there are clams. And so Gina and Lauren actually went out and met with the clammers and literally made a hand-drawn map of where those clam habitats were, because that did not exist before. And actually we modified alignments and locations of the breakwater to still be effective at attenuating waves, but to avoid some of those priority habitats. So I think the answer is it's a process, and we need to continue to study and adapt our strategies for that.
Thank you. Catherine, first someone says, good job. Is your spouse here today? Catherine, what's the sediment source for the natural accretions for the Marshall Islands? It's a great concept, but isn't Jamaica Bay depleted of natural sediment sources?
That's such a great question. Yes, Jamaica Bay is defined as a sediment-starved bay system. However, there's a great deal of sediment which is being moved around by the Corps. In fact, one of the things we've talked with Peter and Lisa is the idea of local use of local sediment. So how can you have slow sediment, like a slow food system in which you use the sediment, you don't double handle it, but you put it where it needs to go. So having a footprint for the placement of material that's being dredged from the harbor on a regular basis, sometimes a 2-year cycle or a 3-year cycle or an annual cycle, that material can actually be used. It's an incredibly valuable resource and it can be used strategically and in a smart manner.
Thank you.
I gotta add to that. Before Sandy and all these new cool phrases of sustainability and resiliency, the Corps actually did practice regional sediment management, which basically, RSM is the acronym, which basically said we always are going to be maintaining these channels. How can we beneficially use the sand to restore the processes that are being lost or inhibited by the actual channel themselves or other development? So the Corps has been always trying to beneficially or regionally reuse the sediment that's in the system. And as Catherine highlighted, that's something that we always try to do every time we do have a maintenance cycle of one of our channels.
Thank you. Peter, I'll open something very specific for you. How does current storm surge protection projects of the Corps differ from wave erosion projects, burns?
I'm not going to be an engineer, I know I haven't been in the house here, but from what I know is that storm surge projects actually provide you a berm dune system versus a beach erosion control project, and sometimes it's a recreational project because you get those bigger beaches. And so you get a bigger, wider beach at a certain height that it allows the erosion to occur, and the dune system's in place that allows them to attenuate storm surge.
Thank you. The next one is a human ecology question that any of you could answer, and maybe Commissioner, you're number one. How can property owners of waterfront parcels take action to enhance and encourage healthy abutting estuary areas, particularly in consideration of permitting constraints and other jurisdictional boundaries that may in time inhibit individual citizens from taking action? In other words, there are barriers to stewardship. What can you do about it?
Also wondering if maybe Venetia would want to answer it when she comes up later as well. Let's see, individuals that could do something about stewardship. I mean, I think that if there were, and sort of the premise of that question is that there would be an individual who was interested in stewardship. And I think that there are a lot of experts in the regulatory community, whether it be at DEC in all seriousness, or the Army Corps, or Parks Department, or other agencies that regulate the shoreline, who are very committed to these ideas. And if there was a place in which making sure that we can connect to those people, I think would be one of the ways in which it would be most effective. Because I think there are quite a few design ideas out there that those people could benefit from.
Yeah. In my own plant ecology work, I know you can always plant in a tidal adjacent area. You can't remove vegetation, though. Can a private citizen go to the intertidal and add some rocks or a pile of shells? Is that permitted, or would they be arrested?
No, they would need to go talk to DEC.
They would be arrested. And the agency, the operational agency, is the state DEC, not parks.
That's right.
That has to be communicated
I
to
think
everyone who has a waterfront piece of property. You can help. I can't deal with all the questions. There's some wonderful ones, but these folks will be around all day. My two final questions, then we run out for lunch. Science needs. If you could want to know one thing more, what would you like to know? You can pass if you don't want to answer. Pippa?
I think, as I mentioned before, better understanding of the ecological ecosystems and the impact of some of these nature-based features that do resiliency on ecosystems and hydrodynamics. And I think we're ready to start testing some of these, and so I think that's a big
Ecosystem function, a big need.
and water quality.
Catherine?
I'd like a really good sediment transport model that could actually help me, as you know, we've actually discovered that the fetch model gives us feedback for design. I'm looking for a sediment transport model that would give me feedback on how to help these marsh islands survive into the next century and longer.
Thank you. Peter, any needs?
Yeah, I actually would shoot for a HRE or New York City wide or Harbor Bite long-term monitoring program that would include the physical data, chlorine data, and the critter data, because I think it would be important. Louisiana has something already in place, something that we could have over either every 3-year or 5-year basis that you can then show trends of what's going on within the system.
Oh, that's good. For that, you need institutional memory, long-term funding sources, and...
You didn't ask that. You just said
No, I'm just reflecting. And professional staff who knows what the previous fire gal did. Data management. Commissioner?
Yeah, I think in particular, sort of taking the same question you asked me, is that given, sort of taking as a given that we live in a world where fill is not easy to do and where we have urban communities that need to be protected, identifying geographies where nature-based systems would really work, and then B, what evidence we have and evidence that we can communicate to the public, repeating a theme that I think is really important, is being able to communicate out to the public where wetland restoration and nature-based systems really work.
And finally, I asked, what's your biggest nightmare? What's your big worry about the things you design? Commissioner, can I start with you, just to
Sure.
pick right away?
I think that anybody's nightmare is building a white elephant, so putting a lot of money into something that doesn't work, the first storm comes and hits it, and communities behind it are destroyed.
Yeah. People don't like failures from public projects. Peter?
In this context, it would be if we do provide a dual-purpose project and the safety part doesn't work. So if we did provide a nature-based feature that provided the ecological habitat, but didn't provide that the storm surge protection or wave attenuation was supposed to do, then that would be designed.
Catherine?
Mine's kind of the flip side of that. My worst fear is that coastal storm protection overweighs the need for ecological restoration.
And Ms. Bashir?
In keeping, I think it was both, that it doesn't work, that we don't achieve either the resiliency goals or coastal risk reduction goals or the ecological goals. I think it ties back to the information needs and making sure we're realistic about what things can and can't do.
And that would stop the public and political power behind future restorations. Any failure could always be pointed to.
Yeah.
One of the things, we have this journal, I've left some info outside, Ecological Restorations, a nonprofit journal, that deals with all these issues, articles, reviews, book reviews, editorials, about public policy as well as the science of restoration. And down at the registration desk, there's subscription forms. It's really cheap. And it's something that might help us even when this meeting is over. And with that, I'd like to thank you. You're all wonderful people and a great audience. And I'm honored to be in the same applied ecology area that you all work in. And God bless you and have a lovely lunch.